What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the third and final installment of our notes this week, where, or at least this kind of lecture series that I put together, coming off of the same PowerPoint or Google Slides, where we're talking about really the origins of World War II out in the Pacific. So this is part three parts total. If you haven't seen part one and part two, I'd highly recommend you go back and view those first and check it out in order. We will have a corresponding quiz that's getting posted too, and you'd want to have seen all three of those parts and have your notes handy, all of the stuff and key points that I emphasized. If you wrote that stuff down, you should go through and ace the quiz, no problem. All right, so for part three, first up, I just wanted to recap a little bit from yesterday. We talked about how Japan, to give you a visual, Japan is there are four kind of big-sized islands, all right? And I don't have the names of them all handy, but then within that whole island chain, there's 1,000 other tiny little islands that all together, that chain of islands right here that my cursor is going around, make up the nation of Japan, okay? Island nation, so a chain of islands. Japan, remember, they don't have a lot of resources on their little chain of islands, and they want to be a strong power. Specifically, they want to be, sorry, bell going. Specifically, they want to be the dominant power in East Asia and kind of their part of the Pacific Ocean. Okay, so unlike the Nazis, they don't have the delusions of grandeur like Hitler did, where they're expecting to be the one dominant power on planet Earth. They're just looking to dominate their region of the world, East Asia, and kind of their half of the Pacific Ocean. The problem for Japan is, even though they have a decent amount of people and a very well-trained army, and they have good equipment and technology, they don't have the natural resources they have to sustain their empire. Chiefly oil or fuel. There is no oil in Japan, and then they don't have any refineries. So they relied on America 100% for oil shipments to keep their empire running, to keep their ships going. Ships at this time were running on diesel fuel, and then their planes and tanks, they're going to need diesel and regular gasoline. When America cuts off the supply of oil, and we basically just refuse to sell them anything, they have 18 months stockpiled where they can continue to operate. Now, their ultimate goal is to build their empire up in their part of the world, and they want to be self-sustaining. So in China, they're picking up a lot of farmland where the crops can be grown and grain produced, and then they'll be able to permanently sustain feeding all the people on their island. The next thing that they really are going to need, especially if America's cutting them off of oil, is their own oil supply. Now, it's not on this map, but to the south of everything you're seeing here in this map, there, at the time, it was called the Dutch East Indies, but today it's modern day Indonesia and Papua New Guinea. There is oil reserves on those islands, enough for what Japan needs. And then if they built a refinery themselves so they can take crude oil and convert it into fuel, hey, then they're all set. Then they have a self-sustaining empire. So that's kind of what they're going for. Now, before the Pearl Harbor attack, which is what we're going to be hitting kind of next, and that's what draws America into this conflict, Japan had taken quite a bit of turf. They've gone in and conquered and invaded Korea, which has been a rival nation. So Korea, another Oriental people, to a lot of average Americans, Japanese and Korean people can look the same, but they're very actually culturally distinct and different. And they've always kind of been rivals with each other. And then China is the big country over in the region that had, traditionally throughout history kind of been the dominant force over there. But at this period in history, China is kind of weak and in turmoil. So Japan takes advantage of that, and they take huge chunks of China. They took Manchuria first, which is where a ton of the people in China live. And then since then, and this is kind of going over a few year period, they've expanded out and taken more and more of China. You also notice down here in the darker purple, they took what is called French Indochina. That's like modern day Vietnam, Cambodia, and Laos. Well, remember, they're in an alliance. The Japanese and the Germans are the two big powers on the Axis powers alliance. Now, they're a whole world apart, so they never really fight together in the battlefield. They don't even do a ton of coordination, but Hitler did when Hitler conquered France in a month, and remember that shocks everybody, he does send basically word out to the Japanese and said, hey, the French Empire has fallen. So Hitler and his Italian allies, they go down and take the French colonies in North Africa. But Germany is just in no place to go take French colonies that are on the other side of the world, out in the Pacific or out in the far side of Asia. So to throw a bone to his other buddy, the other member of the team that's way out in the Pacific on the opposite side of the world, he tells Japan, hey, France has fallen. You need to go in and take their colonies before the British or the Americans or the Russians or anybody else can take it. And Japan does do that. They take that French colony there. Now, the islands they need to have the oil are just to the south of what you see in this map. So that's their ultimate goal. They are taking a big calculated risk, and I'll get into this a little bit more down the road, but they think if they can cripple the American Pacific Fleet at Pearl Harbor and sink a bunch of our ships, that, hey, it'll take America a while to beef back up, because they know in a long-term war, America almost certainly will beat them. Even the Japanese, like high command, realizes a long drawn-out war with America is probably not going to work out in their favor. But they're hoping that if they can cripple our fleet and hurt us for a while, that'll give them a little window of time where they can take all of these other islands they need that have the oil. They can build the refineries. And then by the time America's ready to fight, they're hoping, hey, they'll be so entrenched that America can't do anything about it, or that they'll be able to negotiate a peace treaty. All right. Now, it doesn't end up working out that way, but that's kind of what's going through their head at this point in time. All right. Now, where does America fit into all this? We've gone through and we've talked about Japan quite a bit. Now, I would want you to probably skip a line or two in your notes if you're following along and taking that, and put in American isolationism. That was kind of the American policy prior to World War I. If you can think back like 20 years before this, when World War I was raging on for years in Europe, like America, for most of that war, we just wanted to stay out of it. We felt like it wasn't our conflict. We're still developing and industrializing as a country. And then at this point in time, like now when you get to like right as World War II is breaking out, but America's not involved yet, the Great Depression is still going on in this country, and a lot of people are unemployed. People in America are still struggling just to put food on the table and make ends meet. So most Americans just kind of lose track of foreign affairs for the most part. They're not as into it as they had been a few years before, and we kind of return to that like pre-World War I policy where it's like we want to isolate ourselves. We just want to worry about problems here in North America. America first, and the rest of the world, whatever. What's going on over there is other people's problems. We're just focusing on America and getting America back on track. Okay, that's kind of the mindset of most people in America at the time, and most of our politicians. Another reason that we kind of didn't want to get involved in this conflict, after World War I, or actually not after, during World War I, the war had gotten very expensive for all of the big European powers that were fighting it. Now, for most of that war, we were kind of rooting for the other democracies. We were rooting for Britain and France to defeat Germany, and we were helping them out. We would have actually sold equipment and supplies and given loans to both the Allied powers and the Central powers in that war. We would have given loans to Germany too, but Great Britain had used their navy to block Germany off. So they were trying to starve Germany out in that war. So really we only had trading and commerce opened up with Britain and France. And we started giving them huge loans to help them pay for the war effort against Germany. So they had really think of it like Great Britain and France throughout World War I had racked up their credit card. They had taken massive loans out from America. Before World War I, the international hub of banking and finance in the world was London in England, the capital city over there in Great Britain. Throughout World War I, it kind of transitions across the ocean. In New York, Wall Street in New York City becomes the international banking hub of the world. America at this point in time, basically everybody owes us money. Like today in American history, you can think America has a massive national debt and we owe a lot of money out. Well, that was totally flip-flopped kind of in between the period of the two world wars. At that point, we had given out loans and everybody owed us. And nobody from World War I has paid us back yet for those loans. So we kind of feel like we get cheated there too. And it's like, man, we kind of got screwed in World War I, kind of, sort of, where we gave these loans out to our buddies and then they never paid us back. In defense of the British and the French, I don't think it was so much that they didn't want to pay us back. It was that they're going through the Depression too, and they just don't have the money to shell it out and pay us back. So anyway, that's another strike against joining the war. Because of our poor economy and because people still owe us money. For those reasons, most Americans just kind of want to stay out of it. Now, it doesn't mean that we're not paying attention at all. At this point in history, people have radios in their home. Most average Americans, they have access to a newspaper, and at least once or twice a week, they're seeing a newspaper, and you're seeing in the newspaper what's going on in the world. Most Americans have made up their mind that these fascist dictators, guys like Hitler in Nazi Germany, guys like Mussolini over in Italy, and then the country of Japan. It's technically run by the emperor, but there's some other guys behind the scenes that actually do most of the planning and strategic work. So Germany, Italy, and Japan are all examples of fascist states. Americans have made up their mind that the fascists are bad, that we don't like them. We don't get along with them too good. We also think that the Soviet Union, which is a communist country, we don't like them much either. So who is our friend at this point in time? Well, we're sympathetic to the Chinese that are getting beaten up by the Japanese right now. We also are really rooting for Great Britain. They look like they're horribly outmatched, where Germany's going over and bombing them every day and trying to take them out of the war. So we're rooting for Great Britain. We want them to do well, but we don't want it bad enough that we're ready to go send American boys over there and join the conflict. A couple of really key stats that I think you should put in your notes, and you definitely would want points 1 and 2. Really kind of everything on this slide would be good stuff to jot down in your notes. But some stats, polling data was tracked back in this era, and some national organizations actually did do polls where they were tracking American public opinion. 98% of Americans want Great Britain to win. Now, if you went back to World War I, now remember, there were no Nazis in World War I. Germany was just a monarchy. They had a Kaiser, and there was no Holocaust or nothing like that played out in World War I. 2/3 of Americans, roughly, to maybe 3/4. So you're talking like about 60 to 75% of Americans on average at any point in the war wanted Great Britain and France to win. But a huge chunk, almost 1/3 of Americans, were kind of rooting for Germany in World War I. That's not the case in World War II. Most people, even if you're an American that is of German descent, like your grandparents or great-grandparents had immigrated over from Germany, even those people largely don't like Hitler, and they are convinced he is a bad, rotten dude. So overwhelmingly, to get 98% of Americans to agree on anything, I mean, look at the political situation today, how divided we are. Good luck with that. It's hard to get even half the people to all agree and band together and work together on something. So overwhelmingly, Americans wanted to stay out of they wanted Great Britain to win. 98%, that's as darn close to 100 as you can get. But then this next stat, I think, tells a lot too. Overwhelmingly, Americans also wanted to stay out of the war. So 95% of Americans felt like we're rooting for Great Britain to win. Most of them wanted to see them win. They wanted to see Hitler and the other fascist states lose. But 95% of Americans, again, want to stay out of the war. We don't want American boys going over there and dying in foreign battlefields again. So that kind of sums up where America fits into all this. Now, had the Japanese not bombed Pearl Harbor, would America have ever gotten in the war? Who knows? That's the what if game. Maybe something else would have happened and that would have drawn us into the war. Maybe. American neutrality, as the war was progressing and those fascist states are doing more and more rotten things, like Germany is over there bombing civilians in London. They're killing innocent people, women and children. That doesn't set well with us. So who knows? Maybe America would have eventually joined up, but people, for the most part, were pretty resolved that we wanted to stay out if it was at all possible. Now, of course, when Pearl Harbor is attacked and Japan comes in and does a sneak attack and bombs us, that's an open declaration of war. As soon as that happens, that's a game changer. Then American public opinion flips like 180. And I don't have the stat handy in my head right now, but after Pearl Harbor, it's something like 95 to 98% of Americans demand we go to war. They want to get revenge. But of course, that's a big game changer because up to this point, pre-Pearl Harbor, nobody has attacked with us. No Americans really have died. So most Americans want to stay out of the war. Now, some political information for you. Let me move my mug here so you can see all this. In order to prevent America from joining up into the conflict, there were a series of laws that were passed by Congress and signed by our president, Franklin Roosevelt. These laws were designed to keep America out of the war. They were designed to prevent the situation that happened in World War I from happening again. So basically, initially, in these laws, over a period of a year or two, they do get changed. That Congress passes new laws and they start to soften them up. So you can see American neutrality or isolationism starting to weaken as the war goes on and it's getting worse and worse for the allied countries. But initially, the laws are pretty strict. So there's 3 different variations of the Neutrality Acts. What you're going to need to know for the upcoming quiz is just that the laws were called the Neutrality Acts. So that would be a good heading for you. And that the point of those laws was to try to keep America out of the fight. So Neutrality Acts, those were laws keeping America out of the fight, or that's what they were designed to do. But they soften up over time. So the first one we'll just call the Neutrality Act. We'll sum it up as that. I forget the exact bill code number that was attached to it, but call it the Neutrality Act. In this one, the strictest version that was passed first, right as the war broke out, it was basically we would only sell non-military goods. Like we would sell food, clothes, fuel to countries that paid for it in cash. So we aren't selling anything to the Nazis at this point. And it's a little after this time that we cut off fuel to the Japanese because we don't like what they're doing. But we were happy to sell fuel and clothes and food to Great Britain. They're fighting in the war. We're willing to help them out. But remember, back in World War I, they had taken out massive loans for us and they still haven't paid us back for that. So this time we're saying, hey, part of what sucked us into the war in World War I 20 years back was because we had given out billions of dollars in loans, we're very committed at that point to seeing the people we've given the loans to win the war because we want to get our money back. So we don't want that to happen again. We don't want America to get a financial interest in the war where we end up having to go fight just to get our money back. So we say, hey, Britain, we'll sell you basically what you need, that was on the list right there, but you got to pay for it cash up front and you got to come pick it up yourself because we don't want German submarines coming and sinking our ships. All right. The war goes on. Germany starts to bomb Great Britain. France falls. Things are not looking good over there for the people that we were friendly with. So then things get softened up and it goes to a policy. The Neutrality Acts are changed and they call the new policy cash and carry. So once this gets tweaked, now it's like Great Britain, we will sell you whatever you need. We'll give you weapons. We'll give you ammunition, bullets, tanks. Mostly what they needed was planes, actually, like good planes coming over there, fighter planes, so that they could try to shoot the German bombers down that are coming over and hammering London every night. This policy now is cash and carry, where it's like, we'll sell you anything. It's not limited to just food and clothes, but you still have to pay for it with cash. So you have to bring money over to us and you have to carry it yourself. Because like I said, we didn't want German U-boats targeting American ships because that really was the final straw that pushed us into World War I. Germany torpedoed 3 American ships in a 3-day period. And then it was like they openly attacked us. So we're thinking hey, let's not get in that situation again. We don't need American ships going over to England right now. They're at war. They have plenty of ships. The British still had the biggest navy in the world. They can transport all this themselves, but they're paying for it cash up front. Then the war becomes more desperate. Now, our president, Franklin Roosevelt, he has been thinking for a while, America is going to have to get involved in this fight. But his re-election is coming up. And remember, FDR, I'll get into this more down the road, he's the only president in American history that served more than 2 terms. He actually ends up getting elected 4 times to the presidency. Now, after he ends up dying, then we pass an amendment on the Constitution. And today, now it's only by law a president can serve 2 terms. But back then, that amendment hadn't been added to the Constitution yet. So he's running for his 3rd term as president when all this is playing out. Now, FDR, our president, kind of thinks America's going to have to get involved. He's actually pretty open to the idea because he's totally convinced. He's seeing news that the regular American people don't see. And he is getting these reports, and he's convinced that Hitler is a really bad dude. Mussolini's a bad guy. And then what the Japanese got going on, they're messed up too. So he's open to the idea of America joining the conflict, but he wants to get reelected. And if you remember back to that last slide, what's American public opinion like? Americans are united. Both parties, Republican and Democrat, didn't want to get involved in the war. So if he comes out and says, hey, I think we're going to need to get into this fight, what are the chances he's going to get reelected? Probably not very good, right? And he is a smart, savvy politician, if nothing else. So he kind of keeps those feelings to himself. Now, within his cabinet and his advisors and the military guys, he was telling them, man, we got to do more to help them out. We can't let Great Britain fall. That'll be a disaster if Hitler takes all of Europe. He's right. It would have been a disaster. Think of how different the world might be today if America hadn't gotten into the fight and Nazi Germany had won World War II over there. You could potentially still have a Nazi state running all of Europe to this day. That actually is probably a likely outcome if history had, some things had gone differently in this very crucial moment in time. When FDR gets in, though, he is fairly convinced that something's going to happen and we're going to have to get in. And he's like, at the very least, he thinks we need to do more to help Great Britain out. They're our friend. They're our buddy. We definitely know the Nazis are bad. So he urges Congress to soften the Neutrality Acts a little bit more. And this time, the last variation of it before Pearl Harbor happens, and then that changes everything. But the last variation before that was the Lend-Lease Act. Once it gets switched to that, and this is happening during the Battle of Britain when the Germans are bombing the British every day, now it's like we will do whatever it takes to help Great Britain out. We're not going to go over there and directly fight. We're not going to use our military, but we are lending and leasing equipment to the British. So that means we're letting them just borrow military stuff. We are sending planes over there. We're sending ammunition and bullets. We're sending them food. We actually even give 50 destroyers to the British because they've taken heavy losses from the German U-boats. So think of that. A destroyer, that's like the size of one of the small wings of this building. It would take almost a year to make one of those. That's a pretty big gift. We're given 50 of these big destroyer ships out there that are used to go hunt down U-boats. Now, granted, the destroyers we gave them were older and outdated. They were many years old. They were from World War I era destroyers, and at this time we're producing new stuff. But that's a pretty big gift we're giving them. And then shortly after all this gets changed, the Japanese attack Pearl Harbor, and then that's a total game changer, and that's going to push America into the war. All right, so that wraps everything up, kind of gets us through this opening phase. I'd say phase one of World War II. We've laid the groundwork for it. Make sure, hopefully you've seen all of the notes videos that I've posted this week. Hopefully you took some good notes on it. And now once you've wrapped this up, go on over to the next post, which is the quiz. And good luck. I hope you ace it. See ya.